All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and the final part of our sixth edition BCBA exam task list series. And we're going to finish up with ethics. Now, remember, we have an entire ethics code that you should know and that you should abide by as a behavior analyst. But for the purposes of these study guide videos, we're just going to cover the ethics that are featured in the task list. These breakdowns are very to the point and very consolidated because with ethics, we're trying to be as black and white as possible. You want to be as close to the letter of the law, especially on the exam. For a better, more in-depth explanation of each ethical guideline, I recommend John Bailey's book, The Ethical or Ethics for Behavior Analysts. It's going to give you a detailed, comprehensive breakdown of each ethical code. But again, for the purpose of this video and of our study guide videos, we're only featuring what is on the task list and in a very consolidated, easy to digest manner. So be sure to subscribe and like for all of our BCBA, BCABA videos. We have 3 videos a week. We also have RBT exam materials as well. Check out our website. It's in the link below for all of the study materials, including our exams and our study guides. When you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. Let's start with E1. Identify and apply core principles underlying the ethics code for BACB certificates. E1 is our all-encompassing guidelines for ethics. It's telling you, 1, we have to understand our core principles, and 2, we have to be familiar and know the code as a whole. Now, what do the core principles include? Well, we want to do good. First and foremost, we want to do good. The number one priority as an analyst is to do no harm. We never want to harm our clients, stakeholders, or the people around them. We want to treat others with compassion, with dignity, respect, and act with integrity at all times. A big focus of the ethical code is acting with honesty and integrity, not only to maintain how you are viewed, but how the profession of ABA is viewed by the public. So, for example, we want to prioritize client well-being by designing individualized interventions that are in the client's best interest, not just based on convenience or financial incentive. We're trying to address clients and stakeholders in socially valid ways. We're trying to make meaningful, socially valid changes in the lives of our clients. Now, E2, identify the risk to oneself, others, and the profession as a result of engaging in unethical behavior. E2 is hoping that you will acknowledge or guiding you to the acknowledgement that unethical behavior has consequences. You may think if I'm unethical here and there in very small ways, there will not be consequences. But you've got to think about how that's going to reflect on you, on your technicians, and on our practices as behavior analysts. Additionally, if you are constantly engaging in unethical behavior and you get caught, you're risking your livelihood. So, unethical actions can negatively impact clients, lead to loss of certification, and damage the field's reputation. So, for example, let's say we misreport data to show false progress, which leads to incorrect treatment decisions. If you are analyzing your data from 2 weeks of intervention and you've made no progress, that might make you feel uneasy. It might make you feel nervous about what you're going to tell the client. What you don't want to do is misreport that data or change that data just to support your treatment. If we're making incorrect treatment decisions on bad data, that can lead to client harm. It can lead to legal consequences for you and mistrust of the profession as a whole. We really want to establish ABA as a trustworthy profession that is here to help, right? We're using data-based decision-making to help change socially valid behaviors. You want to know that being unethical carries risk not only to yourself, but to others and the profession. E3, develop and maintain competence by engaging in professional development activities. Once you pass your exam, you're not just done, right? You're not just done learning and done growing. One, you have to keep up with your continuing education requirements, which are required by the BACB. But two, you need to do your own growing and learning. You have to stay current with the research. So you have to know what is currently going on in the field of ABA, the field of behavior analysis. If you work with kids with autism, what is going on in the field of autism? If you're in education, what is happening in the education field? All these things are constantly changing through research and experimentation. So if you have been a BCBA for 5 years, what was true 5 years ago may have shifted 5 years later. It's up to you to maintain those competence. And you might say, well, why does it matter? I work with only teenagers with autism. It's a very narrow scope. Well, it's on you to provide the best possible treatment for those teenagers. So if there's new research pointing at improved intervention or improved outcomes, it is on you to know that and understand that. So how can you improve your competence? You can attend workshops and conferences. I suggest you go to conferences. Go to one a year. They're fun. You get to meet other like-minded behavior analysts. You get to hear a lot of smart people talk about our field. They're a fun time. I recommend trying to go to one conference a year. You can also get continuing education credits for those conferences. Read scientific literature. Every now and then, read a journal article, right? At least read the abstract, read the method, read the results. Just exercise that skill, right, of understanding more research-based findings. Seek mentorship. If you are constantly finding yourself working with kids with ADHD and you're not an expert in ADHD and you want to learn more, well, reach out to people who are experts. You'd be surprised that simply reaching out, asking for help, how many people are willing to give you their time. And then you also want to always be developing your skills, right? Don't just use your same treatment plans that you've been using for years. Those should be modified based on results, right? We're trying to be pragmatic and empirical. And so you want to always modify your approach, right, based on what you've learned while developing and maintaining your competence. So for example, we have a behavior analyst. Let's say you're working in a new setting like a school. Well, you want to understand a little better the educational policies and classroom management. Not only is it good for your client and you, but you're going to be able to collaborate better with the people inside that classroom. E4, identify and comply with requirements for collecting, using, protecting, and disclosing confidential information. Now, this one is very straightforward, right? Privacy is at the top of the list for our priorities. We work with humans. They have private information that we are privy to, including medical history, learning history, educational history, family history. We've got to respect that. And this is how we maintain dignity. This is how we show respect. You would not want your private information and data being just given out to anyone who asks. So we have confidentiality requirements that protect client privacy. And we have to follow relevant laws, things like HIPAA, which dictate what we can and can't share. This is a very strict ethical guideline here. You've got to maintain privacy at all times. How can you do that? You can encrypt digital records. So a lot of things we do now are all digital. You want to make sure those are safe. You can limit access to client files and information to authorized personnel. Always obtain consent from the stakeholders before sharing information with anybody. It doesn't matter if you get a call from someone who claims to be the speech therapist and you're the ABA therapist. Before you share information with that speech therapist, check with the stakeholders first, the primary stakeholders. And then always, like we said, always obtain written consent before sharing data with others. So privacy, one of the most important ethical guidelines we have. If you breach privacy, you're not only breaching the ethical code, but you're now breaking the law, which is why you have to take this very seriously. E5, identify and comply with requirements for making public statements about professional activities. What does this mean? What does it mean to make public statements about professional activities? Well, for example, let's say you have an intervention that you designed. You personally designed that intervention and you really believe in it. You use it for a month, it doesn't work. What you can't go and do is lie about how effective your intervention was. Or you can't say my intervention will guarantee results in 3 months. We never guarantee results, one, but 3 months is a very short time frame. You can't just make claims about the efficacy or the effectiveness of your practice. You want to refrain from promoting yourself as a specialist in areas without proper certification. If you're a BCBA, you're a behavior specialist. You're not a sensory specialist. You're not a speech specialist. You're not a life skills specialist. You're a behavior analyst first. So unless you have certifications and credentials, we don't claim to be something we're not. Social media, there are strict social media guidelines when you are going by our code. We don't ever post on our personal social medias about clients, right? And we only share on our business social medias with consent. So public statements we make have to be accurate, transparent, and align with BACB guidelines. This is content on your websites, social medias, public presentations, advertisements. Just think about whatever statement you're making. Is it 100% truthful? Is it 100% backed by the facts? If it's not, if you're exaggerating or you're making claims that you might not be able to back up, then we don't make that statement. E6, identify the conditions under which services or supervision should be discontinued and apply steps for transitioning. Now, there are several reasons why we are allowed to discontinue services now. We can discontinue services once we've met all goals, if our stakeholders are not complying with what we're asking them to do, if funding runs out, if we're not making progress, if we're not competent with the client. There are a lot of different ways, right, or reasons to discontinue services. But if you're going to discontinue services, we also have to think about how we're going to transition that client to somebody else. So before you ever even start services, you should have a transition plan in place. If we are to exit the client for any reason, how are we going to deal with that exit? Because we don't just quit on clients immediately. There has to be a period from the time we say we're ending service to the time we're actually done. We've got to help them transition and ensure continuity of care through referrals and communication. So for example, let's say a client reaches their goal. We need a transition plan with how the stakeholders are going to maintain those gains. Remember, maintenance is key. If we're no longer working with them, how are they going to maintain the progress we made? And then if you're transferring a supervisee, document current progress and share all relevant training materials with incoming supervisor. Don't be stingy on the information you share when you are transitioning or moving clients. If your client, for example, moves to another state and they begin ABA in another state, don't be stingy about what you share. Our number one goal, right, is do no harm. And then we want to have the best for our client. So whatever that new service provider needs, you should try and provide. E7, identify types of and risk associated with multiple relationships and mitigate those risks when unavoidable. This one's always pretty obvious. I think everyone's pretty aware of multiple relationships. A multiple relationship is when we cross from professional into a personal relationship with a client or stakeholder. We are not allowed to do that. At all times, we must remain strictly professional. Now, does that mean we can't be cordial and build rapport? Absolutely not. We have to still have a good relationship with our clients. But to the fullest extent possible when unavoidable, or to the full extent possible, we want to avoid multiple relationships. And if they're unavoidable, we've got to mitigate those risks. What do we mean by that? Well, let's take, for example, a small rural area where dual relationships are unavoidable often. Let's say you've got 2 behavior analysts for one town. Well, chances are, if it's a small town or a close-knit area, those analysts might know the people in that town. And it might not be feasible to seek help elsewhere. In that case, unavoidable multiple relationships, but we still have to mitigate the risk. We can do that by clearly communicating roles, understanding that when we are working with the client or delivering services, where they're in a professional capacity, not a personal capacity. And you want to understand the impact of that dual relationship on service quality and objectivity. That's the key word here. When you develop a personal relationship with your client or stakeholder, you start to lose some of that objectivity because now you're biased and you've got personal feelings and thoughts that are coming into play. That's not good for service delivery. Multiple relationships can create conflicts of interest, compromise objectivity, and harm the client or supervisee. We want to be sure and avoid it at all points. If we can't, we have to mitigate the risks that come along with those personal relationships. E8, identify and apply interpersonnel and other skills to establish and maintain professional relationships. So just like we said, we have to avoid dual relationships. That doesn't mean we cannot build rapport and build relationships with our clients and stakeholders. That's in fact a requirement and a key part of service delivery. Effective supervision, effective client relationships rely on strong communication, active listening, and collaboration. Those 3 things cannot happen unless we're building rapport and maintaining relationships with our clients and our supervisees. So we have to be smart about how we do that, but we also have to be personable. Okay, we are dealing with humans. We don't just want to be this cold data robot. Okay, you've got to have some sort of warmth and empathy and understanding that goes along with delivering our services. So, for example, if you're receiving feedback, you respond with openness, ask questions, and demonstrate a willingness to adapt. Those are good interpersonal skills. Denying the feedback or not accepting the feedback or taking it as an insult is just going to damage those relationships. When you're the supervisor, you want to be collaborative with your supervisees. You want to get their perspective, problem solve together. Everything we do is about teamwork. We talk a lot about collaboration. Everything is a collaboration. We're all on the same team because we've all got that common goal, which is the client's well-being. E9, engage in cultural humility in service delivery and professional relationships. So these cultural variables that are newer to the 6th edition are loosely defined, right? What does it mean to be or engage in cultural humility? Okay. It could mean different things to different people, but what we're looking for is respect. Okay. So cultural humility is the process of self-reflection. You're recognizing your own biases against people or cultures or background, and then adapting and using that self-reflection to respect cultural identities. Here's the fact is if you live in a big city or a big town, or even if you live in a small town, we are living in a melting pot with different backgrounds, different cultures, different people, and it's only getting more diverse. So if you're not comfortable around certain cultures, around certain ideologies, you're going to have to really reflect on that and think about how is that affecting my service, right? When we're designing treatment plans and skill acquisition plans or behavior reduction plans, a lot of that is coming from our personal background. If you're targeting a behavior for increase or reduction, a lot of that is your opinion on what is right and what is wrong. Different cultures have different opinions on how we should act. Some cultures think it's more okay for kids to run around at a young age, be energetic, be wild, okay, in schools. Some cultures think it's much more regimented. Okay. Not for us to judge, it's just for us to recognize the culture you're working with and adapt based on those recognitions and reflections. So, for example, we can ask about preferred communication styles. What about holidays they celebrate? What are some cultural practices that we need to recognize, that we need to teach, that we need to focus on? Integrate these cultural variables into your treatment plans. What specifically can we do to not only conquer our goals as analysts, but achieve what you want to achieve as, let's say, a mom or a dad raising a person in this environment? Okay. So we have to be aware of all different cultures, and you have to be aware of how that may affect your service delivery, acknowledge that, and understand how can I better serve all clients regardless of background. E10, apply culturally responsive and inclusive service and supervision activities. So, more about being culturally responsive, being inclusive in both service and supervision. What does this mean? So, when we're culturally responsive, we're trying to design interventions and activities, supervision activities that respect and align with cultural values and needs of clients and supervisees. So, just like E9, what can we do to design our approach that better fits in with culture? And now we want to be careful here, right? Because you have your own culture, you have your own background, and there's, again, no reason for you to just push all that aside for somebody else. What we're talking about here is working as a collaborative team, right? Working to develop the best plan while considering all these variables. And you might say, well, this is a lot to think about. It is, and that's a big part of your job as the analyst. How do we factor in all these culturally relevant variables? Is it possible to design this treatment plan and also conquer these cultural variables? Sometimes you might have to have a discussion with your stakeholders. Hey, we understand where you're coming from. It's just not possible to achieve the best outcomes doing it this way. Is there another way to do it? And in supervision activities, you've got to think about your technicians and their backgrounds. What do they want to work for? How do they respond to criticism and feedback? And all these things have to be taken into consideration as a behavior analyst. So, for example, when creating a behavior plan for a bilingual family, try to incorporate both languages and see if you can ensure materials are accessible in English and the client's primary language. For supervision, how can you be mindful of cultural factors, how they influence learning styles and preferences? E9 and E10 are just about understanding and being empathetic about where a person comes from and how that influences their view of the world and your service. E11, identify personal biases and how they might interfere with professional activity. So this is a good lead in from E9 and E10. As we're examining cultural variables and backgrounds, your own biases are going to pop up. And anyone who tells you they're not biased against anyone or anything is just flat out lying. You're an adult, you have a learning history, whether you like it or not, and that learning history leads to biases. As an analyst, you're going to develop your own biases the more clients you see. When you're 5 or 10 years into practice and you've seen all different families from all different backgrounds, when you get a new client, you're going to size that client and the environment up immediately and start making judgments about it. Those are biases at play. That's just how it works. You learn, you observe, and you start to develop these systems of beliefs. Now, biases influence decision making and interactions, whether you're conscious about it or not, which is why you have to always reflect on those biases. You want input from other people, input from other supervisors, input from technicians. Have a conversation about it, right? I'm seeing it this way. How are you seeing it? Get a different perspective. It's all about perspective. Don't pretend to not have biases because you think it's going to make you look better. Because everyone does, everyone has biases. The best thing you can do is reflect on those biases and figure out where am I coming from, right? What's the other perspective on these issues? Because when you're designing treatment plans and behavior plans, you want to be as objective as possible. Biases are the quickest way to remove objectivity from any given situation. And then E12, identify and apply the legal, regulatory, and practice requirements relevant to behavior analytic services. All this is saying, right, is we need to adhere to relevant laws, regulations, and professional requirements to provide ethical and effective services. This means maintaining licenses, maintaining certifications. What do insurances need from you? It's going to be your responsibility in a lot of cases as the analyst to ensure that every treatment plan you write and submit is going to be approved for insurance. Okay, you never want to make a mistake of not understanding what insurance needs and costing a client service time. You also want to know what are the state and federal mandates on timeout and punishment and speech and referrals, all these different things. Now, do you have to be an expert in law? Of course not. But you've got to know enough and be aware enough of your own practice, of your profession, to not make silly mistakes. Will you make mistakes? Yes, everybody will make mistakes. The best thing you can do, though, is be as knowledgeable as possible to prevent making unnecessary mistakes. So, for example, let's say you move to a new state. You need to understand the state's licensing laws, comply with funding policies like Medicaid or TRICARE or Blue Cross Blue Shield, and ensure you meet continuing education requirements. So not only does the board have CE, but a lot of times licensing boards in each state also have CE. So that wraps up our ethical code review. Remember, this is just the items on our task list. You should be familiar and actively go and look at the full ethics code. I recommend John Bailey's book, Ethics for Behavior Analysts. I recommend you read that book. If ethics scares you, if we went through this study guide and you still don't feel confident, go read John Bailey's book, Ethics for Behavior Analysts. It's the best source possible for ethics in ABA. But keep working hard, keep studying hard, keep up your fluency, and you're going to be fine. When you pass, make sure you let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Subscribe for all of our updates in our videos. Check out our website for study materials. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.